The Abandoned Bride. Rain fell in slow, relentless sheets along the deserted country road. Puddles formed at the edges, reflecting the gray sky like fractured mirrors. On the shoulder, barely visible beneath the soaked hem of a wedding gown, stood Emily Carter. Her shoulders trembled, not from cold, but from a heart that had been shattered in a way no storm could soothe. Hands clutching a bouquet of wilted roses, she stared blankly at the horizon, waiting for a sound she knew would never come. The morning had begun with promise. She had brushed her hair into a delicate braid, arranged the veil just so, and allowed herself the foolish hope that today would mark a perfect beginning. Daniel Harper, her fiancé, had smiled that morning, an absent, distracted smile, but it had been enough. She had believed in it. She had believed in him. Yet now, standing on the side of the road with the faint hum of tires in the distance, Emily felt the full weight of betrayal. Daniel Harper, who had promised a lifetime of devotion, had chosen another. Rumors whispered in the edges of her memory, glimpses of Sarah Mitchell, the woman Daniel had secretly courted, flashed like lightning. The thought made her stomach twist. The letter he left, hastily scribbled, offered excuses that sounded hollow even to her own ears. No one had stopped. Cars passed without notice, strangers' eyes sliding past as if she were nothing more than a shadow in the drizzle. The world seemed indifferent to her pain, as though heartbreak were invisible to those who had never lived it. She sank onto the wet curb, letting the cold seep through her gown and into her bones. She felt utterly alone. And then came a sound different from the rain, the crunch of gravel under boots, steady and deliberate. Emily's head lifted, a mixture of curiosity and caution rising in her chest. There, in the distance, a figure appeared. A cowboy, tall and rugged, moved toward her. His face was obscured beneath the wide brim of his hat, his coat dark and dripping with rain. In his presence, the storm seemed to quiet, not entirely, but just enough for her to notice him. He stopped a few feet away, letting the silence speak first. Emily's heart beat erratically, uncertain if she should flee or plead for help. Then, softly, a voice cut through the drizzle. "Come with me now." It was neither commanding nor desperate. It was gentle, yet infused with a certainty that seemed impossible in a world so cold. Emily stared at him, confusion warring with relief. Who was this man? Why should she trust him when every promise she had clung to had dissolved into nothing? He extended a gloved hand, the gesture simple but profound. Emily hesitated. She thought of Daniel's betrayal, of the life she had envisioned, now nothing more than a memory drenched in rain. Yet, beneath the fear, a flicker of hope stirred. Maybe this stranger, this cowboy who appeared out of nowhere, could offer a different path, one that didn't end in heartbreak. The wind tugged at her veil, the droplets on her cheeks indistinguishable from tears. She looked once more down the road, imagining Daniel's smug face, and then back at the man who waited with quiet patience. Her fingers brushed the hem of her gown, muddy and soaked, then tightened around the bouquet one last time. She let go, dropping the roses into a puddle where petals floated and mingled with the rain. She stepped forward, boots splashing in the water, her fingers brushing against his as she accepted his hand. In that simple touch, Emily felt the first pulse of something unfamiliar. Trust, perhaps, or the tentative beginnings of courage. The cowboy nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and gestured toward the road ahead. No words passed between them beyond that first invitation, yet the silence was not empty. It was filled with possibility. For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, Emily felt as if she were being seen, not as a shadow, not as a mistake, but as someone who could move forward. And so, she let him lead. Together, they vanished down the winding country road, rain washing over them, leaving behind a past too painful to reclaim. Emily did not look back. The horizon stretched ahead, uncertain, storm-tossed, and yet full of promise. The abandoned bride had finally chosen a path of her own. The cowboy's road. The rain had eased to a drizzle, leaving a mist that clung to the edges of the road like a curtain. Emily Carter, still trembling from the shock of abandonment, walked beside the cowboy, his presence steady and unyielding. Jack Lawson, as she would later learn, moved with a quiet confidence, each step measured, purposeful, as if the earth itself acknowledged his rhythm. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his features, and the collar of his coat, damp with rain, rose slightly against the chill. He never spoke much, but in every motion there was an unspoken understanding. She was not alone anymore. Emily's mind swirled with questions, doubts, and fragments of the life she had lost. Daniel Harper's betrayal lingered like a ghost, his absence screaming louder than his presence ever had. And yet, in the calm determination of this mysterious cowboy, she sensed a chance to escape the confines of her grief, to move beyond the suffocating weight of a shattered engagement. They reached a small clearing where a solitary horse waited, saddled and patient. Jack gestured toward it without a word, and Emily hesitated. Memories of weddings, rings, and promises flashed in her mind, each a reminder of the life Daniel had stolen from her. But then her hand brushed the leather reins, rough and familiar in its simplicity, and a spark of courage flickered. She mounted the horse, clumsy at first, her fingers gripping the reins until her knuckles whitened. Jack's hands hovered nearby, not intruding, only ready, his presence a silent assurance. Once settled, she felt a strange shift, as if the weight of despair began to lift. Jack swung onto his own horse, and together they moved down a road that twisted through rain-slicked fields, mist curling around their ankles. As the countryside blurred past, Emily's thoughts returned to Daniel. She remembered the early days, the soft smiles, the promises whispered in quiet moments. She remembered Sarah Mitchell, whose face had haunted Daniel's absence with cruel clarity. Betrayal was a bitter taste, lingering and suffocating. But beside Jack, she realized that not all strangers were indifferent. Not all roads led back to pain. There could be paths towards something unfamiliar, yet comforting. Jack finally spoke, his voice low, measured, carrying the weight of someone who had seen life's harshness but refused to surrender to it. It's not the road you chose, but the one you take now. The words were simple, yet they struck Emily with precision. She glanced at him, seeing only the shadowed outline of his profile, but sensed an honesty she had longed for all her life. The journey continued in silence, punctuated only by the soft clop of hooves and the occasional rustle of leaves. Emily's fingers unconsciously traced the edges of the reins, grounding herself in reality while her mind wove fantasies of escape. Jack's gloved hands occasionally adjusted a stirrup or nudged the horse forward, actions so mundane yet reassuring in their consistency. Hours passed. The mist thickened, hiding the distant horizon, creating a sense of seclusion. Emily felt both isolated and safe, a paradox she couldn't reconcile. Her heart, once shattered and exposed, now tentatively began to trust. She allowed herself a fleeting glance at Jack, noting the way his posture suggested experience, resilience, and an unspoken promise of protection. As evening approached, the skies softened into shades of amber and rose, and Jack guided them toward a small ranch nestled among rolling hills. A modest cabin, smoke curling from its chimney, suggested warmth and shelter. Emily's breath caught. The promise of safety, of an unfamiliar but welcoming space, was almost tangible. She dismounted with more confidence than before, brushing rain-soaked hair from her face. Jack offered a hand, helping her steady herself, and she noticed the faint calluses on his palm. A life of labor, grounded in reality, yet capable of tenderness. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and leather. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Emily sank into a chair, her gown damp and heavy, and finally allowed herself to breathe. The world outside, with its betrayals and losses, felt distant. Here, in the presence of this faceless cowboy, there was space to heal. Jack's gaze never pressed, never intruded. He simply stood near the hearth, the subtle tilt of his head inviting trust. Emily realized that she was not expected to explain, justify, or confess. She could simply exist, and that existence, simple, quiet, safe, was enough. As night fell and the wind whispered through the trees, Emily understood something essential. The road ahead would not be easy. Pain lingered, memories of Daniel and Sarah casting shadows on her heart. Yet for the first time since the betrayal, she glimpsed the possibility of a different journey, a path defined not by abandonment, but by choice. And though the cowboy remained faceless, silent in many ways, his presence spoke volumes. He was more than a stranger. He was a guide, a protector, and perhaps, if she dared, something more. Emily settled by the fire, warmth seeping in her bones, and for the first time in hours, a fragile sense of hope began to bloom. Shadows of the past. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's small, frost-speckled windows, casting long, fragmented patterns across the wooden floor. Emily Carter stirred, pulling her damp gown tighter around her shoulders, though she had long since set it aside for comfort. She watched the fire's embers glow faintly, reflections dancing in her eyes, and realized she had slept through much of the night without waking to the familiar ache of despair. Jack Lawson, faceless yet present, moved quietly around the cabin, attending to practical tasks. His boots scuffed softly against the worn planks, hands steady and competent as he prepared a simple breakfast. The act itself, mundane yet deliberate, was grounding. Emily noted the rhythm of his motions, the care with which he worked, and felt a small, unfamiliar warmth seep into her chest. Their journey so far had been silent in many ways, yet Emily sensed a quiet understanding forming between them. Trust, fragile but persistent, began to take root. She wondered briefly about the man who had once caused her heartbreak, Daniel Harper, and the life she had lost. The memory of his betrayal still stung sharply, especially knowing Sarah Mitchell's cunning smile had replaced Emily's place. But beside Jack, she was learning that not every presence demanded pain. As breakfast ended, Jack suggested they take the horses to the nearby hills, a gesture that felt both protective and liberating. Emily mounted her horse with growing confidence, feeling the muscles beneath her tighten as the reins came alive beneath her fingers. Jack followed closely, guiding them through dew-drenched meadows where the mist hung low, softening the edges of reality. Emily's mind wandered back to Daniel, to the moment she had found the letter, the emptiness of his betrayal etched into every word. The pain had been so sharp she had feared it would remain lodged in her chest forever. Yet the physical motion of riding, the rhythmic beat of hooves on soft earth, seemed to push some of the memories back, allowing space for thought without anguish. Jack, as always, remained mostly silent. When he spoke, his words were deliberate, each syllable carrying weight. You carry more than you should. Let the road hold some of it. His meaning was clear. Release, even if only a little, and trust that not all paths lead to loss. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the words sink in, feeling a slow shift within her, a recognition that she could reclaim fragments of herself. The ride led them to a clearing overlooking a river, where mist hovered like a gauzy veil over the flowing water. Emily dismounted, letting her boots sink into the damp earth. Jack did the same, and for a few moments, they simply stood side by side, faceless yet unmistakably present in shared silence. She allowed herself to observe the curve of his shoulders, the deliberate movements of his hands, the ease with which he breathed in the crisp morning air. Each subtle motion conveyed a story she hadn't yet been able to hear in words. It was here, in this quiet space between past and possibility, that Emily realized the gravity of her choices. She could cling to the pain Daniel had inflicted, letting it define her, or she could step forward, allowing herself to trust again, even if it meant vulnerability. The memory of betrayal was still a shadow, but it had lost some of its power over her. Jack broke the silence finally, his voice low and steady. The past doesn't disappear, but it doesn't get to decide the rest of your story. Emily absorbed the statement, letting it echo in the spaces the river mist seemed to fill. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he had appeared just when she was broken, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she allowed the silence to answer, finding comfort in his steady, non-judgmental presence. The ride back to the cabin was slower, deliberate, as if the land itself acknowledged the tentative healing taking place. Emily noticed the way Jack allowed her space to reflect, never intruding, never forcing conversation. It was a kindness she had never known, a contrast to the chaos of betrayal she had endured. By the time they returned, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose. Emily dismounted, brushing the damp strands of hair from her face. She felt lighter, though not entirely free, as if a portion of her heartbreak had been set aside on the winding hills they had traversed. As they entered the cabin, the fire rekindled. Emily felt a quiet resolve settle within her. Daniel's betrayal no longer held the same power. She was beginning to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding strength in moments of trust, in gestures unspoken, in roads taken with care. And though Jack remained faceless, his presence had become a symbol of something far greater than simple companionship. He represented possibility, patience, and the subtle promise that even after heartbreak, the heart could begin to beat with hope once more. Emily sat by the fire, feeling the warmth seep into her bones, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in weeks, the shadows of the past no longer felt insurmountable. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to meet it. Choosing the road ahead, the cabin lay quiet in the early morning, mist curling around the edges of the porch like a soft embrace. Emily Carter stood near the doorway, hands gripping the wooden railing, watching the world awaken in muted hues of gold and gray. Her mind wandered to Daniel Harper, to the life she had imagined, now nothing more than scattered fragments in puddles of rain and memories. And yet, she felt no longing, only a calm clarity. That chapter was over, sealed by his choices and the betrayal that had followed. Jack Lawson approached silently, his footsteps soft against the wooden planks. He carried a small bundle of firewood, setting it beside the hearth without a word. The act, simple in itself, felt monumental to Emily, an unspoken testament to care, constancy, and presence. She no longer needed his face to understand the sincerity in his gestures. The cowboy had become more than a stranger. He was a steady anchor in a life that had been violently shaken. A distant sound carried through the morning air, an engine, approaching along the gravel road. Emily's chest tightened instinctively. It was Daniel, she realized, perhaps come to demand answers or plead for what he had discarded. She turned toward the sound, recognizing the familiar hum of entitlement, the faint arrogance embedded in the throttle of his vehicle. A part of her still felt anger, a simmering reminder of deceit. Another part, however, felt the fragile satisfaction of empowerment. She now held the choice he had denied her. Jack's gloved hand brushed against hers, not in touch, but in reassurance, a reminder that she was no longer alone. Emily inhaled slowly, steadying her racing thoughts. The engine drew closer, and with it came the figure of Daniel. Seen only from behind, shoulders stiff, posture rigid, a silhouette of the man who had caused so much pain. Sarah Mitchell was nowhere in sight, yet her influence lingered in the tension radiating from the approaching vehicle. Emily took a deliberate step forward. The rain had left the world softened, edges blurred, and shadows stretched long across the road. She did not flinch. Daniel exited the vehicle, his movements sharp, insistent, as if expecting her to yield. But she did not. Her gaze, focused and unwavering, conveyed a silent message. The life she had lived before, defined by betrayal and manipulation, was no longer hers to inhabit. Jack remained close, yet did not dominate the space. His presence, steady and silent, amplified Emily's strength rather than overshadowed it. He nodded subtly, a faceless gesture of encouragement. Emily's fingers tightened briefly around the railing, grounding herself in the moment, in the clarity that choice had afforded her. Daniel's voice eventually broke the tension, carrying a tone of disbelief and frustration. "Emily, But she cut him off, her inner resolve manifesting outwardly in calm, measured actions. She shook her head, eyes never leaving his shadowed frame. No words of apology, no excuses could undo the betrayal she had endured. She had learned the hard truth. Forgiveness could be internal, but reconciliation was not her obligation. With deliberate composure, Emily turned her attention back to the open road, to the mist-laden hills where Jack's horses awaited. The decision had been made, not in anger, not in haste, but in quiet certainty. She would not cling to the ruins of the past. She would walk forward into the unknown, guided by someone who had earned her trust through patience, integrity, and unwavering support. Jack extended his hand again, this time not just as a gesture of safety, but as an invitation to partnership, to a journey begun together on her terms. Emily placed her hand in his, feeling the rough warmth of calloused skin against her own. The simplicity of the contact conveyed more than words ever could: trust, care, and the promise of a path untangled from betrayal. Together, they walked toward the horses, their steps synchronized in quiet understanding. Emily mounted with newfound confidence, Jack following suit, guiding his own mount beside her. The morning light touched the landscape in delicate shades, illuminating the way ahead, a road neither predictable nor free from challenge, but undeniably theirs to traverse. As the horses trotted forward along the winding path, Emily glanced at the horizon, the mist slowly lifting to reveal glimpses of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Daniel's figure grew smaller behind them, a fading echo of a past she would not reclaim. The betrayal that had once defined her now served as a marker, a lesson etched in the foundation of her resilience. Emily's grip on the reins relaxed, her heart steady, and a faint smile curved her lips. Beside her, Jack rode silently, faceless yet fully present, embodying the quiet promise that some journeys are best begun not with certainty, but with courage and trust. The road stretched onward, rain-soaked yet gleaming, an invitation to a future shaped not by betrayal but by choice, hope, and the subtle, unwavering rhythm of two hearts moving forward together.